Hi, I'm Holly, and today I'm talking about a book called To Be a Roman: Topics in Roman Culture by Margaret A. Brucia and Gregory and Daugherty. So, today's video is actually about a book written in English, not in Latin, but one that's really made me think differently about learning Latin. So, To Be a Roman is a detailed and beautifully organized book about Roman daily life. It's divided into 20 chapters covering everything from family and education to religion, slavery, occupations, law and order, basically all of the essential features of Roman society. And before I go on talking about the different things that I really like about this book, I'm going to give you a little taste of what it's like. So, I want to read a short passage from the section on Roman death customs. Since it's November when I'm recording this and it's kind of gray and cold and dreary outside, it feels kind of fitting. Um, but in addition to that, and maybe it's just my own morbid curiosity, I've always thought that how a culture treats its dead is very interesting. So, this passage comes from chapter 3 on the religious rituals of the family. The senator died at his home, and his oldest son confirmed his death by leaning over his father's body and calling his father's name. He has already kissed his father on the mouth in an effort to catch his father's last breath. The senator's body was now prepared for burial. First, his eyes were closed. Next, he is bathed, and a wax impression of his face is taken. Then, his body was dressed in his finest toga, with all the insignia of his rank and office visible. His corpse was now arranged on a funeral couch, or seated in a chair, in the entryway of the house and surrounded with flowers and incense. His feet were pointed toward the door, which was festooned with pine or cypress boughs as a warning that the house was polluted by death. The custom of placing a coin on the dead person's mouth to pay Charon, the ferryman in the underworld, was rarely practiced in the late Republic and the Empire. The body remained on view at the home for 3 to 7 days. If the body had been embalmed, it would remain on view for longer. Embalming, however, was a rare and expensive procedure. And I'm just going to continue a little bit further. Since corpses had to be buried or cremated beyond the city limits, even a poor man could expect some sort of procession to his tomb. No matter how elaborate or simple the procession was, it served as a notice to the community that someone had died. After a crier announced that the senator's funeral procession was about to begin, his corpse was removed from the house feet first so that his ghost would not be able to find its way back inside. Neighbors often joined in the mourning or avoided the pollution of contact with death. And this is where it gets really juicy. The funeral procession featured musicians and singers of sad, slow songs called dirges. Female professional mourners who were trained and hired to wail, beat their breasts, scratch their faces, and tear out their hair stirred the emotions of the attendees. Jesters and mimes performed and relieved the tension. Actors wearing death masks and insignia of the senator's ancestors preceded the body in the procession. The senator himself, with his face exposed, was carried on his couch. Behind him marched his family, including his ex slaves and slaves. At the end of the procession were torchbearers, reminders of the earlier tradition of burial at night. So, when I first read that passage in particular, I remember thinking, "Oh, wow, I've seen bits and pieces of this in Latin text before, but I've never seen it kind of all come together in one place like this." And maybe you are someone who already knows a lot about Roman history and culture, and maybe that's actually what brought you to Latin in the first place. If that's you, then you might already be familiar with much of what is in this book. But if you're like me, someone who always knew culture was important to understanding a language, but maybe only learned about it incidentally in your Latin classes or through reading Latin texts, this book really helps to connect all the dots, fill in the gaps, and bring Roman culture to life. And I always like to remind my students that language is the mode of expression for a particular people in a particular culture to describe their experiences within the context of that culture. So You can memorize every grammar rule and vocab list, but sometimes you still hit a passage that makes sense grammatically, but it doesn't quite click until you understand the cultural context behind it. So, after reading To Be a Roman, which I actually started using for classroom use, but then ended up reading the entire thing cover to cover, I found myself noticing those little cultural echoes more and more. So, for example, when I look up Praefika and I'm like, oh, a professional mourner, right? I can picture the entire thing, the wailing women, the funeral procession, the emotions they evoke. Or when a text describes a body laid out with its feet pointed toward the door, I just read something that had that in it. I can't remember what it was right now. That's no longer a throwaway detail. It means something. It's part of how the Romans understood death, space, spirits, and even their family. Um, and honestly, reading this book made me reflect on my own studies and teaching. Am I placing enough emphasis on grammar? Um, Over my 15-year career of teaching, there's been lots of kind of hot topics that have come and gone. Things like, and I think it's still kind of a discussion, um, whether and how to teach grammar, right? Do you teach it explicitly, implicitly? Do you learn it explicitly? Do you learn it implicitly? What things to read, all of that kind of stuff. But I feel like there hasn't really been a big emphasis on teaching culture. It's kind of treated, I don't know, I feel like there's a tendency or um, maybe it's just really easy to treat culture like an add-on. So something that you can kind of sprinkle in once in a while, a fun project you can do right before vacation if you're a teacher, or maybe like some fluff that you can read if you're an autodidact. But the more that I read, the more convinced I am that it's an essential part of real understanding of Latin. And so I'm going to do my favorite thing and borrow a fitness analogy. Um, you may be at this point thinking like, yeah, I'm convinced. I know culture is important, but I think that this is a useful way to think about it, so I'm just going to say it. So, I feel like learning grammar and vocab is like focusing on diet and exercise. So, you will make a ton of progress that way. Yes, you will. But what about sleep? If you're not getting 8 hours of sleep, it doesn't matter how much you work out or how well you're eating. You aren't going to get your maximum results. There's other things too, like fresh air and sunshine, mental health, maintaining friendships, right? All of this contributes to good health. And the more you intentionally focus on these things and don't just assume that you're going to get enough incidentally, the better your overall health becomes and the faster you reach your goals. And I think culture is kind of like that for language learning. You can incidentally pick up a lot about Roman life through reading Latin texts, whether it's textbooks or authentic Roman texts. But intentionally learning about the customs, values, and worldview of the Romans accelerates and deepens your understanding that much more. And that's what I love about To Be a Roman. It's not just a list of fun facts, it's thoughtful, well researched, and nuanced. And as an added bonus, it even includes comprehension questions, some fun crosswords and word searches, and even suggestions for small group projects at the end of each chapter. So it makes it a great resource for teachers or homeschoolers as well. Also, the final chapter is a gold mine. So if you're thinking like, this sounds kind of juvenile for me as an autodidact. I don't know if I would be into something that includes crossword puzzles and word searches. It's worth it just for chapter 20 because it's a huge bibliography of books, websites, films, fiction about Rome. So if one topic in particular catches your interest, it helps you to find reliable ways to explore those topics further. And something else that I really like is how the authors remind readers that Roman culture changed over time. What was normal, for example, during the Republic might have completely disappeared in the Empire. And this kind of historical awareness makes the book feel kind of trustworthy and grounded, which honestly isn't always easy to find in cultural resources. I find myself having a difficult time finding videos, documentaries, books, other things that I want to read myself or share with my students. Um, because there tends to be kind of like a one size fits all kind of blanket statement, sort of the Romans believed this, the Romans did this, without taking into account the very, very long history and how much it grew and changed over the course of that history. So if you're already deep into Roman history, this might be a great refresher. Or if you're a teacher, it's a great classroom tool. Um, if you're someone like me who's always looking to connect more deeply with the world behind the Latin words, I think that you'll find this book as fascinating as I did. All right. So, just so you know, I don't have any affiliation with this book or the places that sell this book or any of the other books that I talk about on here. If I really like something and think it's cool, I just want to share it. So, um, yeah, if you want to buy this book, you can find it on Amazon because you can find anything on Amazon. But you can also buy it directly from Balchesi Carducci, if you prefer to support them directly. So that's it for today. Um, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Are there any resources that have helped you connect more deeply with Roman life and culture? Um, doesn't have to be books, could be podcasts, could be anything. Let me know in the comments. And thank you so much for watching. Wale.